So to continue, usually this bullying pattern develops unconsciously. The yellow ray energy center is blocked without our ever intending to lose polarity or fall off the enhanced uppercase game board. There are as many ways to be less than loving in our families as there are people in this world. Every situation is unique, yet there are patterns that remain fairly true. So rather than talking in general terms about typical areas of dysfunction in birth families, let us look at one example of this kind of pattern taken from my own experience. This should show us what sorts of issues we deal with in our yellow chakra work with the birth family. And since both of my beloved parents have passed away through the gates of larger life, they will not mind me using their story. Yeah, you see, when we're in our soul self, we see each other as one, the one infinite creator. We're not bothered about petty human things anymore. It's only when you're in human form that you take offense in things. When you're in your soul form, your soul self, you don't take offense anywhere near as easily. And you're not that bothered about things that go on here either. It's just like a game when you're in the spirit realm. I know because I've been there. To continue, my parents were not happy to be forced into marriage. Mom and Pop were equally angry at being caught when they created me. My father was 26 at the time, while my mother was 20. They met in wartime in 1942. Pop was a jazz drummer playing in an Air Force band, and she was serving in the USO as a singer and dancer. A chance meeting at a bond-selling rally and picnic led to their impulsive romance, and I was conceived. Pop's well-laid plans of touring in a big band after his military stint, and Mom's plans of pursuing a promising career as a Dave Garraway's sidekick on the Today Show on radio, then in Chicago, went up in smoke. Their lives were changed permanently by my arrival. Anger and resentment can be expressed in many ways that do not show. My father had a lively intellect, was trained as an engineer, and loved to debate. This characteristic was always a bit challenging for people in general to accept. My mother was no exception. She did not like to debate. Her equally lively mind was more given to intuition and insight than to debate or other intellectual games. She was the scholar and the student of the couple. Her mind was furnished with an unending supply of anecdotal history, detail, and literally observation. She was well able to hold her ground when it came to making a point. She simply preferred not to make points. She preferred to converse with creativity, spontaneity, and brio. Often an evening's table conversation would escalate into my father's goading my mother for her opinion on subjects about which she did not wish to engage. My father would persist and slowly drive her past the point where she could keep her temper. She would burst into hysterics, leaving the room in tears. Pop would just shake his head. He never saw that his intellectual and reasonable style of bullying was a marker of repressed anger at being trapped into the marriage. In the first place, she never saw that her resentment of his bullying was rooted in her resentment at having to be married. This pattern went on year after year while I was growing up, and I would escape the wrangling as often as I could, go into my room in order to find peace if I was not needed to babysit. The Beach Boys said it so well. There is a world where I can go to tell my secrets to. In my room. In this world, I lock out my worries and my fears. In my room. Do my dreaming and my scheming. Lie awake and pray. Do my crying and my sighing. Laugh at yesterday. In my room. In terms of the quotation which began this section, I was being overstimulated by this disharmony and seeing avoidance of the cause by going to my room. There I could create my own atmosphere, put on a smile, put on music. I preferred and enjoyed my own thoughts. I could keep my space today. It was wonderfully healing. In my mother's middle years, she became aware of the toxicity of this pattern of bullying. She broke the spell by forming a standard response to Pop's debate gambits. It was, "You could be right, dear." She learned to appear, to engage rather than refusing to respond, and because she agreed with Pop, he had nowhere to go. It was not a perfect solution, but it did help her energy body clear at yellow ray. I would submit that when he died, my father graduated from third density with flying colours. He was a very service to others polarised person. He volunteered all his life with his music, playing in a big band which offered free dances to old folks' homes each month. He sacrificed his burgeoning road career as a jazz drummer to take a lifetime day job as a chemical engineer so that he could feed his family. He volunteered to serve his country in World War II. After his retirement, he drove older people to their doctor's appointments and brought them meals on wheels. He was faithful to all the ethical ideas of his understandings, even when it cost him dearly. He attended church and had an active prayer life. He was a humble man, and he loved Mother all his life as best he could. He was no villain. He was good, true and sweet underneath the crust which growing up in the Depression had created him. He worked steadily from the age of 5, peddling papers, not to earn money for himself, but to help buy bread for his family. It left its mark. It was the crust which kept him from seeing the damage his debate gene did in the family pattern. At the end of his life, he talked to me about how he felt about Mum. It was a revelation. He had stayed with her when things got rocky, he said, because she was more interesting than anyone he knew. He loved to talk with her. He never could figure out why she was so easily upset. You see, that was unconscious. That was unconscious bullying. And this happens a lot in families. Like I say, I haven't met a family where it hasn't happened. To continue, our whole family system tended to create defended patterns because of Mom and Dad's wrangling. My 2 brothers and I did not engage in the disharmony for the most part. I, the oldest child, and the babysitter tended to go off on my own with my brothers and do things with them. Between us siblings, there was an atmosphere of peace and cooperation. If simply avoidance was my first coping mechanism in family matters, creating a sub-family group by planning activities for my younger brother and me was my second coping mechanism. It worked well. All 3 of us had a really good time growing up together. Herein lies the key to family relationships. Be creative and proactive in changing the energy by focusing on enlarging the feelings of love that there are. While the kids loved and accepted our patterns as they were, we often chose to create a more harmonious environment for ourselves. We moved our own energy bodies into more of a free and open flow. While we could do nothing about our parents' anger, we could and did choose to live in a more peaceful environment. With both parents working full-time plus performing frequently at night, we were often quite free to do so thanks to the babysitter, me. Almost every birth family has toxic patterns of some sort. Each family is different, but it is quite rare that the children of birth family feel that their childhood was easy or that their emotional needs were fully met. As years follow years, each family will fall into ruts over which it may or may not be enjoyable to drive. Therefore, in dealing with our birth families, the Confederation recommends that we spend some time getting a feeling for the basic dynamics of our families. Once we have spotted the recurrent patterns of toxic interaction in our families, we can find ways of changing the patterns, or at least ways to change our reactions to beholding these patterns as they unfold around us. This emotional distance frees up our energy, and as uppercase players on the uppercase game board, that is our goal, to keep our energy flowing. Go with the flow, you know. Since the birth family, according to the Confederation, is chosen by us before birth, we can be confident that we are in the right place in terms of this environment being intended by us to be the best situation possible for learning our incarnational lessons as children. It may be the work of years to get past our resentment of one family member or another once we reach adulthood, but it is work we intend to do when we came in. We need to step up to the plate and accept our birth families. We need to make our peace with birth family members. With my parents, my issues had to do with their leaving the responsibility of the family in my hands in order that they might have more time to further their educational career, centered and performance-oriented goals. I was taken for granted throughout my childhood while working my head off. It was though I were their parents rather than the other way round. Since Mom did not enjoy motherhood, she did not fuss over me. She tasked me, and while I was glad to help, I also developed a deep resentment of the loss of my childhood. I was babysitting at 7, cooking at 10. I never had a concept of play. I yearned to be the centre of attention. I never was. With Pop, my catalyst was in his unending perfectionism. Whenever I accomplished something, his comments had to do with what was wrong with my accomplishment. He was never satisfied with himself, and similarly, he never was satisfied with me. Had I been a stand-up comic, he would have been a tough room. When Mom chose sobriety in her middle age after a slide into alcoholism, I saw my chance to come into harmony with her. Knowing her love of words and her dislike of confrontation, I suggested we correspond. We exchanged perhaps a dozen letters over a period of half a year. At the end of that time, our issues were resolved to our mutual satisfaction. She was free of guilt, and I was free of resentment. Our last dozen or so years together were an unmitigated joy. My Pop was a tough nut to crack. However, as I was praying about finding a way to come into harmony with him on a Sunday morning in church in 1978, I received an impression that I was to meet him after the service in an odd place, the choir woman vesting room. I went, and he was there. I confessed to him my yearning to settle our differences. Naturally, he had no idea that we even had differences. I told him it broke my heart that I could never satisfy or please him. I had real despair over my inability to please him. When I told him this, he was stunned. "You're the best daughter any man could have," he blurted out. And that is all I needed to hear. We were at peace with each other until the end of his life. The next Valentine's Day, I received a card from him. It was handmade. The verse read, "Roses are red, violets are blue. Pop loves his daughter and is glad it is you." Great poem. Not a blessing to my heart, yes. One further example of my birth family woes in my own family was between my baby brother and me. I've always been a mystical and non-dogmatic Christian. My brother became a very dogmatic fundamentalist Christian in his high school years. He became convinced that my soul was at stake because of my channeling. God, this happened in my family as well. For 23 years, he used every family occasion as an opportunity to lecture me and to attempt to persuade me to give up the channeling. From my viewpoint, I was specifically serving my Lord by offering myself as a channel, and so she was. So I could not accommodate him. For nearly a quarter of a century, I just lived through this toxic conversations, not speaking out an argument, although his opinions broke my heart. Finally, I realized this was too painful to continue. I told him that until he could promise not to try to change me, I would not visit him at Christmas time. I did not see my brother and his family that next Christmas. Almost 2 years later, I got a call from my brother, in conversation with a Jewish friend whom he was attempting to convert. His friend asked him, "If I never convert, I am still your friend, right?" "Of course," said my brother. "I would never cut you out of my life or heart because of a different opinion." Then it flashed across his mind, "But I cannot say that about my own sister." He telephoned me and promised that never again would he try and change me, and he never has. Our relationships in the birth family last for a lifetime. As uppercase players, our goal is to inject love, peace and understanding into these relationships, generously celebrating our family members for exactly who they are, yet celebrating ourselves by setting limits as needed so that we do not become doormats for bullying, no matter how well-intended the managing might be. There are some families whose level of dysfunction is such that we may need to remove ourselves completely, at least for a time, for their influence. If it is this case, as players, we need to do so without locking these people out of our heart. We can go away physically if needs be, but we need to continue to love them from as far as best we can.